So today there's two events going on that we're participating in. If you remember back on August 22nd, pro-lifers gathered at Planned Parenthood centers across the nation to protest this abortion giant's scandalous trafficking in body parts from aborted children. There were over 78,000 people protesting across the country, which was a historic protest. It was going on at 354 different sites throughout the United States, in 6 different countries even. And now, we learned, of course, that in the middle of this ongoing national scandal, that the same organization, Planned Parenthood, has now come into our community of Las Cruces. And they have an administrative office here, and they're training volunteers and holding advocacy rallies. And it seems that they're planning on opening up a second facility here. So we are participating in that event as well. Right now, as we're having this midpoint rally, almost 300 cities also are having national protests around the nation. And this is the movement that is going to lead to the end of abortion in America. We're saying enough is enough. We're protesting preborn child killing while we're also coming out to stand and pray for life and march for life. Now, it's also day number 18 of 40 Days for Life. So it's close enough that we're having our midpoint rally. It's worth mentioning too that I want you all to know, if you didn't see in the email this morning, that your prayers and your fasting and your peaceful presence coming out here are working. And yesterday they had a save. They had a baby they saved. A woman approached the sidewalk advocates, Martha over there, and as soon as the woman started talking to the sidewalk advocates, a couple of the prayer warriors started praying very fervently. And the woman, by the end of the conversation, decided to choose life for her child. So that's also the third turnaway that we've had. Now, we always distinguish between turnaways and saves, because sometimes women will go away for that day, but they're still iffy. They're still not sure if they're going to come back or not. So we've had 2 turnaways on day number 2, and we had a save, a confirmed save yesterday. So praise God, and if you needed any kind of motivation or affirmation for continuing to come out and be this crazy person standing on the sidewalk praying in public, that's it. That's a life that's going to impact the world in ways that you'll never be able to imagine because of you. So thank you very, very, very much. Never be discouraged when we don't hear those stories, though. I just learned this a day or 2 ago, but there's a guy named Mark Bombchill, who was a former security guard at the Robbinsdale abortion mill in Minnesota. And he worked as a security guard for this abortion facility for a long time. And later on had a conversion and became pro-life and repented. And now he does pro-life speaking. And one of the things that he testifies to is that when he was a security guard in these clinics, anytime the women would change their mind and choose life for their child, they would escort them out the back door and help them get away quietly so that the pro-lifers on the sidewalk out front would not see them, because they knew that would motivate them, and they did not want them to be encouraged. So they're aware, they know good and well that these are the things that motivate us and keep us going. So when you don't hear those stories, be aware that they're happening anyway, even when we don't hear about them. So today is this is a special event that I really, really like, is of course the March of the Crosses. And the last couple times we've done this, I've talked about how in the scriptures in 1 Corinthians it says, to us who are being saved, the message of the cross is the power of God. Okay, so there's really no more powerful thing to add. We're already doing prayer and fasting, which is the most powerful form of prayer that we have. In scriptures, of course, it says certain evils can only be driven out by both prayer and fasting together. But now we're adding to the message of the cross, which is the power of God. And I firmly believe this is that the Las Cruces, God has plans for Las Cruces. It might be years and years down the road, I don't know. We're working on His schedule, not ours. But I have faith, and I have a feeling that the city of the crosses is going to be very significant in our fight for life. Now we're marching. Again, this isn't a parade, but we're marching to bring the power of the cross where Christ is the most needed. And we're marching on the biblical model, as it says in Judges chapter 5, down to the gates marched the people of the Lord. The people of the Lord marched down for Him against the mighty. So we're marching against the mighty of this world. These are people who are very powerful. They have lots of money. They have lots of influence. the people of this world, and we're trying to live outside of this world, bring something of the next world, the next life here to witness. And this is, I mean, if you consider the Planned Parenthood facility in College Station that was closed and became the national headquarters for 40 Days for Life, and is now a pregnancy resource center run by 2 former abortionists, that's a story that only God can write. I couldn't even come up with a story that hopeful, if you had asked me. So we're doing this on this biblical model, and this march has this basis not only in biblical history, but also in Christian history. I was wondering what new I was going to talk about, and I'd been listening to an audio lecture by Professor Thomas Madden, who is an expert in early Christian church history, especially the Crusades and things like that. How you guys doing? Welcome. And I heard him talking about Constantine, and I said, that's what I'm going to talk about. And he was explaining, it's kind of interesting, there's kind of this interesting paradox that in the early church history, the Roman pagans, that in that first century after Christ's ascension, the Roman pagans were polytheists. So they were open to any new gods. The more gods, the merrier. So a lot of historians kind of wonder, here you have this society that is open to new gods. Why did they begin persecuting Christianity? And the Romans actually had a deep respect for the Jewish God, because they had this ancient God, and they liked this Jewish story of this ancient God based in history. But what happened was the Christians refused to recognize any of these multiple pagan gods. And the Roman people were very pious, and they attributed all the wealth and success of Rome to their piousness, to this polytheistic society. And so when the Christians would deny all these other gods, they, at the least, the Romans just thought that was rude. Because even if they only had one pagan god, they at least let everybody else do their own thing. So here are these Christians insisting that no, there's only one God. And they said, well, at first they didn't mind, because they said, well, we worship the same God as the Jews. But over time, the Jews started saying, no, these Christians are with us. And so from the Roman mind, the Roman perspective, here you have these people who renounce all these other gods, and the Jews refuse them, so they don't even have a religion. And the Romans, as far as they consider them to be atheists. They consider the first couple centuries of Christians to be atheists. And that baffled my mind, because here, 2,000 years later, that seems so ironic, right? Because now the perception is that there's this battle between monotheism and atheism. And in the first centuries, the Christian monotheists were considered to be atheists by the Romans. So it was very easy for the Romans, as bad things would happen to society, to point out to what they considered to be these impious Christians who would refuse to recognize any of the known gods, including what they considered to be the Jewish God. And so I lost my train of thought. And then of course there were all these other rumors going around, because as time would go on, they heard about these weird Christian ceremonies, and they heard about them claiming to eat flesh and drink blood in the Eucharistic Lord's Supper services that they had. So they considered them to be cannibals, and then they called everyone brother and sister. And so they said these Christians are crazy. They refuse to recognize any gods. They're practically atheists. They're cannibals, and they're incestuous on top of that, because they all call each other brothers and sisters. So it became very, very easy to blame the Christians. And as more and more emperors came through, they started persecuting this Christian cult as far as they were concerned. So now at first, Christianity flourished under persecutions, and of course there's the famous quote written in the year 197 in the 2nd century from Tertullian that says, "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church," because as Christians were persecuted, their witness, their faith, they would go to their persecution in spite of public perception, willingly, with a smile on their face, ready to go to this next life. And you don't do that for a fable. You don't do that because you're trying to gain something in this world. Most people are trying to gain either money or power or women in that time. And here are these Christians renouncing those three things with their vows of obedience, poverty, and chastity. And they're going to their deaths. And so what they believe must be pretty powerful. They really believe this. And so it would slowly spread. Now, persecutions can be effective if they're carried out consistently over a long period of time. But what would happen is you'd have these waves of persecutions, and emperors would come, and some would be more tolerant and others wouldn't. And so they'd be persecuted, and then they would let off for a little while, and then it would explode. Christianity would spread everywhere, and then the persecutions would come back in certain regions, so they'd all flee to this other one, and then it'd explode there. Well, this happened, and it continued to grow because of persecution until the Emperor Diocletian. And Diocletian was when he hit Christianity the hardest and the longest, and actually threatened to wipe Christianity off of the planet. This is when you had Christians being fed to lions for sport, for entertainment, for the pagans to watch. I found it really interesting too, just if you remember a couple months ago, in the middle of all this news about Planned Parenthood coming out, this national scandal, I mean, this should be headlines everywhere. And then you had, of course, that story about Cecile the lion, right, that was killed. And regardless of what you think of that, the fact that the media covered that story of the lion more in one day than it had covered this Planned Parenthood story in 2 weeks combined from the Media Research Center, which is just absurd. Again, you know, that may be a newsworthy story, but really, when you have all these children being killed and sold, and all these undercover videos coming out and exposing it, and meanwhile they want to talk about a lion. And I found this parallel really interesting, because even after that lion, they projected the picture of Cecile the lion up on the Empire State Building as in memory. They had memorial services for the lion all around the country. They had rest in peace Cecile the lion signs. And it reminded me of this pagan culture, because a culture of death will always cheer for the lion over the innocent. A culture of death will always cheer for the lion over the innocent. And it's no different 2,000 years later. So Emperor Diocletian, he reigned from the years 284 to 305, and this was the worst persecutions that hit Christianity. Again, it actually threatened to eliminate this new religion. And there was a dramatic reversal of fortunes for Christianity, which in fact was one of the most remarkable reversals in all of human history, all because of the decisions and actions of one man that came down to one battle, that really came down to one symbol. And this was where Christianity would go from being under the heel of the Roman Empire to being put on a path not only to be tolerated, but also to become the official religion of the empire, and of course shape Western civilization as we know it. And this was because of the Emperor Constantine. He was the son of Constantius, who was the Caesar Augustus in the Western Empire from 305 to 306. And his mother was Saint Helena. Helena, who's credited with going, once she became a Christian, she went to the Holy Land and rescued all the artifacts of Christ so that they wouldn't be destroyed with the Ottomans and all the empire coming in. And so Constantine was in the east at the time when his father passed away, and all the troops proclaimed him to be the new emperor, the new Augustus. However, a few months after that, he still hadn't gone to the west yet, and his brother-in-law had been pronounced the emperor by the Praetorian Guard, like the Secret Service kind of. And he ended up having control of more troops and more power, and won the influence of all the people and all the military in Rome. So for a few years they tried to settle this, because Constantine felt that he was supposed to be emperor, and he was kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time. And he was a pagan at the time. But in the year 312, it was finally just came down to open hostility between these two. And Constantine led his troops, the few troops that he had, towards Rome to wage war against Maxentius, who was his brother-in-law. And this was a huge gamble, so much so that some historians actually wonder if Constantine actually wasn't that intelligent, because the gamble was just too high. He was outnumbered so severely. He was going up against this Roman Empire that was completely fortified, with the city of Rome that hadn't been conquered in centuries. And it was a strategic disadvantage. And so again, at the time Constantine was a pagan, he was aware of Christianity, and he was one of these ones who was tolerant of it. He didn't want to persecute him, but it didn't really bother him that other people were persecuting him. And so when he went into this battle, initially he had no intention of anything Christianity or saving them or stopping the persecution, but a day or two before the battle, several accounts from history attest that he had a vision in the sky of a shimmering cross Now he knew this cross was the symbol of these Christians, and so he thought, well, this Christian God, among others, has appeared to me. This is something out of the ordinary for a general at the time to witness. And so he felt that he had this message, and that night he had a dream of Jesus coming to him and showing him a symbol, which was this Chi Rho symbol. And it's the P and the X, which in Greek, the X is CH and the P is R. It's CHR. It's the first 3 letters of Christ's name. It's like his monogram, like his initials. And there was the words along with the symbol that said, by this sign, in this sign you shall conquer. So he couldn't really ignore this. He still wasn't a Christian, but he marched into battle by putting this symbol on a banner, a red banner, on a cross, just like this one. Probably a lot bigger, probably more ornate. And he believed that he'd been chosen at that point to end this persecution of the Christians. So he carried this into battle. And it came down to this one battle, which was the Battle of Milvian Bridge, just outside Rome at the Tiber River. And Maxentius came down to intercept Constantine and cross this bridge. And that one move on his part was put him at a tactical disadvantage because he had no way to retreat. And it put him at, it really limited his mobility, even though he had more men, like 6 or 7 to 1. So it cut off his retreat, and needless to say, Constantine indeed defeated Maxentius. And he credited his victory to this God of the Christians and converted immediately and accepted this as the sole religion. Now, at this point, he was the unquestioned emperor. And the following year, he issued the Edict of Milan, which called for tolerance across all of Christianity across the empire, and all bloodshed came to a screeching halt. It was still the minority religion. It was still only about 15% of the population at the time. So as a politician, so to speak, he still had to work with his new faith, but also tolerate the majority religion. So there was some confusion at some time about whether he was Christian or pagan, but he still had to work with all these pagans. But he poured tons of money into establishing public Christian churches for the first time in Christian history. They could worship freely in public. In fact, two of the churches that he founded are still today known as St. John Lateran and what became St. Peter's Basilica. He was also the first person to decree Sunday as an official day of rest in the secular governments. And ever since then, even secular governments to this day continue to follow Constantine's model of having Sunday as a day of rest, not just for religion, but also for the secular world as well. So it's interesting, though, because this battle is one of the few battles in history where, had things gone the other way, the world as we know it would be completely different. And for all we know, Christianity might not have made it. It really came down to that one battle, which came down to the cross. So I thought this was very appropriate to mention on our March for the Crosses, because today we're facing a spiritual battle. Constantine faced a physical battle that threatened the existence of Christianity. We face a spiritual battle. So we're bringing the cross. Each and every one of you, we asked you to bring a cross, and you did. And we're bringing a cross, the symbol of Christ, the power of God, as the Bible tells us, into this spiritual warfare, into what at times can seem like all the odds are against us. The cards are stacked against us. How can we possibly end this enormous monster of a tragedy such as abortion in America? But I truly believe that just like in the Battle of Milvian, that history is going to look back at 40 Days for Life and all of the national protests that are going on right now as the turning point in the right to life. So we're bringing the same symbol of the cross with that same promise that we will conquer by this.